Welcome to the Brennan Center at the NYU School of Law. I'm your moderator from this evening. My name is Adam Serwer. I'm a journalist at The Atlantic. I'm a staff writer in the Ideas section. The Brennan Center is a nonpartisan law and policy institute that works to reform and revitalize when necessary, defend the systems of democracy and justice. You can keep up with their work online at brennancenter.org, or you can follow them on Facebook or on Twitter. And you can listen to their podcasts on their website or wherever you get your podcasts. Let's always stop all the podcast apps are terrible. But you should still listen to the Brennan Center podcast. So tonight we're hosting one of the Brennan Center's own, Mike German, who is a fellow with the Brennan Center's Liberty and National Security Program, where he focuses on law enforcement and intelligence oversight and reform. He used to work at the ACLU as the Policy Council for National Security and Privacy, and before that, he served 16 years as an FBI special agent specializing in domestic terrorism and covert operations. And today we're discussing his book, Thinking Like a Terrorist. We're discussing his second book. His first book is Thinking Like a Terrorist, which we'll also read. But we're discussing his new book today, Disrupt, Discredit, and Divide, How the New FBI Damages Our Democracy. In the book, Mike outlines how the FBI since 9/11 has transformed itself from being famous for prosecuting organized crime and corruption to becoming a secretive domestic intelligence agency. Please welcome Mike German. So I think we're going to start with a question which some people here may know the answer to, but which I think everybody is probably curious about, which is, why did you go from being an FBI agent to being a staff attorney at the ACLU?
That's just what everyone does at the FBI. and to be clear, I wasn't an attorney. I was a counselor.
Oh, you were a
policy counselor that worked on the policy in the legislative office. I actually had a friend from college who knew me when I was in college, and all I talked about was wanting to join the FBI and be an FBI agent. And we met up after I started working at the ACLU, and he said, I never could have pictured you working as the ACLU. And I said, yeah, I never could have pictured that the U.S. government would have a torture policy. And I don't think I changed that much. I think that the government changed around me. So, I just saw that a lot of the changes that were happening within the FBI, within the Justice Department, were putting at risk the things that I had joined the FBI to protect. And the ACLU was doing great work then to address that. And so that seemed like a great place for me to go, and luckily they let me come.
So speaking to that, can you tell us a little bit about the political climate when you joined the FBI, and then how it was different when you left?
Sure. So I joined the FBI straight out of law school in 1988, and it was when there was a big hiring phase. The FBI is a really small agency, only 12,000 FBI agents around the country and around the world now. So growing up wanting to be an FBI agent, the issue was always, are they going to be hiring? And there was this period of time where savings and loans had been deregulated, so the people who owned savings and loans were investing in all kinds of crazy get-rich-quick schemes, and the bottom fell out of it. And back then, the Justice Department used to prosecute people who treated publicly insured money that way. And so there was a huge hiring to work on savings and loan fraud, and that's how I got hired straight out of law school.
I think you hinted at this, but you referred to the FBI as a small agency, which I think may come as a little bit of a surprise to the audience. But in fact, you mentioned this in your book, that the FBI is actually smaller than the NYPD.
That's correct, yeah.
Whereas obviously the NYPD serves a city of millions of people, but the FBI is responsible for a country of 300 million.
Right. And again, only 12,000 of the 30,000 employees are actually agents, and they're spread over, I think now there's something like 60-something field offices and dozens of legal attaché offices abroad. So for the impact they have on our society, it's really incredibly small.
Your book goes back to the origins of the FBI and what it was originally meant to do. Can you talk a little bit about that original mission, and is it, in your view, has the FBI strayed from it, and was it necessary, if so, for it to do so?
So the FBI was created through executive fiat. The Attorney General at the time, Charles Bonaparte, wanted the Justice Department to have its own investigators to help work cases, and went to Congress seeking the authority to hire these investigators. And Congress said no. There was a lot of expression that they were afraid of having a federal police agency that would spy on average citizens, and so they rejected this proposal. So when Congress adjourned, President Roosevelt gave the Attorney General the authority to just hire the agents. And by the time Congress came back, the agents were already hired, and there was a prominent story in the newspaper based on leaked documents about congressional corruption. And President Roosevelt said, you know, is it just that they're trying to protect themselves, and change the political climate in quite a drastic way? So with the Attorney General's promise that he would keep this agency in check, they went ahead and let it go forward.
An early lesson on how well the FBI manipulates Washington politics.
Right.
So you write that a misunderstanding of the relationship between, quote, radicalization and violence has distorted the FBI's approach to its mission. And could you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. So when Teddy Roosevelt started the FBI, his argument was that this was an agency that would hold the most powerful to account. The most powerful business people who were committing frauds against the public, corrupt officials. But very quickly after that, in the approach to World War I, the government wanted the FBI to be involved in more espionage-like activities in countering the threat from German provocateurs and German spies. And that grant of authority opened the door to spying on people's political beliefs. And they were no longer concerned with who was actually doing harm, but who was thinking the wrong thoughts. And the center of those thoughts tended to be around universities, journalists, people who were in the business of spreading ideas, rather than people who were committing crime. And they labeled these people radicals because they were all seeking some kind of radical change to the establishment, whether it was the financial establishment or the government establishment. And that concept of targeting radicals for suppressive work, because when they're not committing crimes, you have to have other means to go after them, was something that I think really appealed to a young J. Edgar Hoover, who ultimately became the director of the Radicals Division of the FBI and ultimately director of the FBI itself. And that concept of radicalization, that it's not the people who are doing engaging in violence that are the problem, but the people who are spreading ideas that might lead to violence as a problem, is what this radicalization concept was. And after the Palmer raids, there was a public outrage about the abuse of these law enforcement authorities. So there was a reestablishing the FBI as a law enforcement agency. Harlan F. Stone, the Attorney General, came in and said, no, we're going to have a law enforcement mission for this organization that will prevent that kind of political spying. And it only lasted until the run-up to World War II, when again, fear of national security threats led to an expansion of the FBI's mandate. And they again revived this radicalization concept, mostly after the war, when Hoover again saw communists as the big problem. And there weren't a lot of communists, and they weren't doing a lot. So he wanted to expand it to include socialists, because sometimes socialists say things that sound like what communists say. And then that expanded them to the anti-war left, that they were saying things that sounded like what the socialists said, so we might as well have a program to examine them. And all, again, from this concept of radicalization, that it's the spread of ideas that's the problem rather than the spread of violence.
Can you talk a little bit about how that approach to radicalization has reproduced itself in the modern day? Because all that, I'm sure, sounds very familiar to the audience.
So it was interesting, because when I started working undercover in terrorist groups, I was basically, the advice I was given was to wear jeans and a t-shirt and not my suit and tie. So I was desperate for some kind of information about how to work with these groups and what they were trying to accomplish, and looked at academic works on the topic. And there were basically two schools of terrorism research. One that argued that terrorism was the product of a diseased mind, that it was some sort of mental defect. And a lot of mostly psychologists and psychiatrists did studies trying to find this mental defect that could be useful both in finding a cure for it, if we could find the defect, but also in identifying people with the defect before they had become a terrorist and isolating them from the community. And then the other school was mostly political scientists, and they argued that terrorism is just a label that we put on certain kinds of political violence. But you can't understand that segment of political violence without understanding all of the political violence in that situation and understanding it in context to the conflict, so that it was silly to try to study terrorism in and of itself. And by the 90s, when I was working undercover, there had been enough psychological studies that they realized there was no defect, that these were rational